right here? We don't, what is this right here?
Connecting rod.
Connecting rod. All right. Now, how would you increase the stroke? If you were going to increase the stroke on an engine, huh?
Change the crank.
The crank's the only way. You can do whatever you want to with that rod, but you're not going to increase the stroke. If you shorten the rod, you may move the piston farther from the head, which is going to lower compression. If you make the rod longer, you're going to bang the head against there. All right, now on a diesel engine, on the average, how close does the piston come to the head on a diesel engine, Nick?
Sir.
On a diesel engine, how close does it come?
About
I put Nick down for a cell phone violation. What? Yeah. How close?
.005 minutes. I don't know.
0.005? Well, what is that? How would you say that?
50,000 of a minute.
50,000? That's not 0.005. That's 5,000.
Well,
All right.
50,000 of a minute.
No, it comes up to about 40 thousandths of an inch typically, but 40 thousandths, what it does when it gets hotter, it'll get really, really close because everything swells up a little bit, okay? All right, anyway, now what's this down here for?
About counterweight.
Yeah, basically, it wanted to run smoother and all that. Now, one of the things I want to talk about, how many degrees are there between the firing events on a four-cylinder engine? In other words, how many degrees does the crankshaft turn between firing events on a four-cylinder?
And then 360.
180.
180, listen to that girl. She got it, she remembered, didn't you? So how did you know that? Did you just remember the number?
Yeah.
It's 4 into
Because it was on
720.
the thing.
Yeah, it's on the thing. Oh,
It's
you were on
700
that,
and
yeah.
something, but it goes to 180.
Yeah, you ran through the electric thing, didn't you, that I built? Okay, so anyway, so here we got so it's a 180. What about a six-cylinder?
90.
That's an
120.
120, right? So you got that. All right, so there's the shaft. Anybody ever get the shaft? All right, there you go. This is the block.
Stroker on my stroke.
This is the block. A hole for each piston, oil galleries, cooling system jacket, bearing saddles. Now, what do you call these things?
Freeze blood.
Why do you call them that?
Because they freeze, they pop out.
That's not what they're there for, and it won't always, that's not 100%. Every now and then you'll see the ice, and why does freezing make them pop out anyway?
Because when water freezes, it expands.
It does, how much?
I just know it expands.
9% by volume. You gotta remember that. What would happen if water didn't expand when it froze?
We don't
Ice
need freeze
wouldn't
blood.
float. Ice wouldn't float and kill all the fish, because it's sink to the bottom of the lake, right? Got it? Anyway. So, cooling system jacket, bearing saddles for crankshaft and camshaft and block. Now, you see these big old holes right here where the coolant flows through?
Yeah.
Are the holes in the gasket the same size as those holes?
Should be, but I don't.
No, they're not. If they were, it would overheat. They're little tiny holes. Right? Little tiny holes in there. Okay, so those little tiny holes are there so that it'll have more time to gather the heat out of the head before it goes back. One time we were doing a job on back there in that service bay where that Envoy is. And the guy that was working on it was the guy that was from over in Elba. And he says, I don't like these head gaskets. He was pretty sharp, cookie. And I said, what's going on, Sean? He says, the holes in these old head gaskets were really small where the water goes through. And on this one, they're cut the same size. And I said, do not put those head gaskets on that motor. And so it was Felpro gaskets. And so I called the parts store, he called Felpro, and they would, oh no, don't do that, we'll send you some new gaskets. Because they were just, like, it would burn the engine up and it had been their fault. To see somebody that wasn't paying as much attention as he was, would have put them on there with the same size holes that was in the head, and when the water goes through it too fast, okay, it overheats. What happens if you put 100% antifreeze in a coolant system?
They run too cold.
Seriously? It turns to jelly at 8 below zero. Doesn't work right. If you mix it with water, it does really well, but by itself, it ain't worth a tooth. So you don't ever do that. Matter of fact, one manufacturer accidentally put pure antifreeze in a bunch of their truck engines, and it cracked heads and messed them all up and everything. They had to put a bunch of warranty repairs on there. Bearing saddles for the crankshaft and the camshaft and the block. And see that, that's where the crankshaft goes. What do you call these? What goes in there?
Oh, what now?
What goes in these holes right here?
Crankshaft.
Crankshaft goes in there, and what do you call these? These part right here that unbolts and lets the crankshaft come off? What do you call the bearings that go in there?
Main bearing.
Main bearing, the main bearing cap, right? There you go. Yeah, we're just trying to make sure everybody's on the same page. All right, now then, what goes right here?
Timing chain.
Timing chain, good folks. All right, pistons. Now, if you're gonna rebuild an engine yourself, like if you're rebuilding your own engine, and this is a high mileage engine, the smartest thing you can do is bore it out 30 thousandths and put some new pistons in there. Because if you just go ahead and have it borne out 30 thousandths and put new pistons in there, you know you got good round holes and there ain't no taper. I don't know how many times we rebuilt motors back in the day, back in the 70s, we just throw rings and bearings in there on faith.
Oh, one of my uncles started telling me back in down, I think he said like the 50s or 60s.
Mm-hmm.
They'll take, when they rebuilt the motor, they put some tin cans.
Yeah,
They put tin cans in the cylinder.
yeah.
Piston.
Yeah, I've heard of people doing that kind of thing. I had never tried that.
On
but I've
straight
heard
sixes.
I've heard people talking about it. Anyway, all right, here's your camshaft. You got these egg-shaped lobes. Open the valve. Camshaft has a lot to do with how the engine breathes. I wanted to, you need, when you pull it out, you gotta get the lifters out, you pull it out. Now, a lot of the older lifters didn't have this wheel on the bottom, they were just flat. And it would ride directly on that camshaft lobe, but when you're pulling those flat bottom lifters out there, what are you looking for? On when you're rebuilding.
Where?
You wanna see if it's dished. It ought to be perfectly flat. If it's got any dish in it, not only should you replace those lifters, you should also replace the camshaft. Now occasionally, on those little flat bottom lifters, they would get beat out where they were a little bit too big to come out the hole. How do you get them out of there?
With a hammer.
How are you gonna hit them? You ain't going to the bottom, you gonna go in that little bore right there with a hammer? Unless you're a little bitty boy and you got a great big hammer that you can swing, that ain't happening. You gotta, the way you get out of there. What do you think, Nick? You gotta get those lifters out of the holes in that block. Wait a minute. Now those holes right there, see them little holes right there? Gotta get them out. They won't come out this way, they gotta go back the other way, so how in the world are you
Turn
gonna
the
do?
cam until it starts to pull up and you can pull
Huh?
it out. I don't know.
Here's what you do.
We did it.
You take your, you turn your camshaft until it's pushed all the lifters up out of the way.
I just said.
And then you pull the camshaft completely out, and then you put now I'm talking about with a motor in a truck, right? And then you take a antifreeze jug or a piece of plastic like that and shove it in there so you can push those lifters out the other way and that jug will pop, and then they'll be laying in there and you just pull them out that way, and then you put new lifters in there. That's a little trick you can, don't charge anything extra for that. Push rods, what do you know about push rods?
They help deliver oil and push the lift.
They don't all help deliver oil. Some of them are solid. You know, on that 3.1 in that car that you was just working on, the push rods are two different lengths. They're every other one is a half-inch shorter on that one. So you got to be paying attention when you pull them out of there, so you'll know how they go back. Right?
Question for you, what causes dead lifters?
Dead lifters? You mean where they won't pump up?
Yeah, you can just take a push rod and just punch down.
They're leaking internally. You know, they're basically worn out on the inside where they're usually have a channel worn out in there where oil can just get by them instead of getting, cushion. So the hydraulic lifters, what they do is they keep the valves adjusted automatically. And on that Chevrolet engine over there, you've got to adjust the valves by tightening those rocker arm nuts down to where you're putting that thing in that range, and there's actually a way to do that. On a lot of the engines though, you just tighten the rocker arm assemblies down and everything like it ought to be, but on that Chevy you got to adjust it. On the straight 6 Ford you got to adjust them. Most of them you don't have to adjust them though. On Hondas, you actually have to adjust them with a screwdriver and a wrench and a feeler gauge. And on Hondas, what happens? The valves gets a little too tight because they wear into the, the valve wears into the seat, they get too tight, then you wind up with the valves not seating well, and you wind up with rough idle issues and misfire codes and all kinds of stuff like that. So if you get a Honda that's giving you misfire codes, a little bit of rough idle, and maybe some fuel trim issues, and nothing seems to make any sense, why don't you go ahead and adjust the valves? It only makes sense, because that's what they need a lot of the time. And it's not that difficult to do, but you kind of got to know, you always got to have that lobe up when you're adjusting the valve, okay? All right, there's your base circle and your lobe lift. Like I was telling you all the other day, if you take a mic, now you said dial indicator, and that was a good answer in a way, but if you got a camshaft laying on the table, you can't do much with a dial indicator, can you? If it's in the motor, you can, but you measure from here to here with your mic, and then you measure from there to there, that's gonna give you lift. What's the other consideration on camshafts? Lift and what? There's two different things that you're concerned about on a camshaft. Lift and, huh? Duration, he said duration. So you got that? Lift and duration. Duration is how fat this is. That's how long it keeps the valve open, okay? All right, so
Open the can.
now here's how the eggs line up. Let me ask you this. What is this overlap for? We've talked about this before. You better remembering it.
Do what?
Overlap. What's that overlap for? Why do they overlap those? Why do they have that overlap? There's your exhaust lobe center line and your intake lobe center line and your lobe separation angle. Well, what the heck is this overlap about? What does that actually do? What did we tell you about your intake, compression, power, and exhaust? What's going on when the piston gets to the top of the exhaust stroke? What's going on? The exhaust valve hasn't quite closed yet when the intake valve begins to open. So there is a brief period of time when the intake and the exhaust valves are open at the same time. And why does it do that? Because you're wanting that incoming mix to purge the exhaust, make sure that it's got a perfectly clean mix. Because if you don't, you're gonna have a rough idle and it's gonna, run like, it's gonna sound like a daggum two-cycle engine idle, all that stuff. All right, valve timing, belt or chain? What's better? Is the chain better than belt?
Yes.
Yeah. I would say so, because I don't know.
Well, now, chains still fail and they still have to be changed.
But it's gonna
Would you
last.
rather change a chain or a belt?
I rather change the chain.
Belt's gonna be easier to change, but
Now, if the vehicle is a free spinning engine, that means the timing belt on that Toyota engine out there that we fool around with all the time, if it's out of time, the valves and the pistons don't ever meet each other. On every timing chain engine I've ever known anything about, if the timing, if the cam and the crank gets out of line, valves and pistons come into contact, they just beat the crap out of each other. Kias or do that, are horrible to do that. If it jumps time, you're supposed to be changing the thing at 100 and I think 102,000 or something like that. And if you go to 108,000, it's probably going to jump time, going to destroy the motor. And with some of the 4-liter Kias, the early Ford Escorts, the really early Ford Escorts, the first ones come out, they would bend valves and stuff when they jumped time. Then they fixed them where they wouldn't, well, they thought that was a bad idea. But a lot of them, Mitsubishi, if a Mitsubishi jumps time, you're gonna have bent valves. Now, if the Kia jumps time, it's gonna snap the head off valve and beat the crud out of the piston, and you can put a motor in that one. But you can do a valve job on the Mitsubishis. And the Mitsubishis, a lot of times, have the motor in there backwards. Means the timing belt will be on the driver's side, which means the engine runs the opposite direction. Yeah, always runs the way the car rolls. All right, heads and valves. Now, another thing, let me back up for a second. These laminated timing chains, like that you see right there, they're quiet, but they like to stretch. One time there's this boy that had this 390 in a Ford XL 69 model, and I was going to get this motor to build it and put it in a guy's truck, upgrade him from a 360 to a 390, and I cranked it up in there under his little carport thing, boom, 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 boom. He's going to get rid of the car, and so I took the revved it up, boom, 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 and then when I took the timing cover off, that timing chain was so loose you could take it off with your fingers without taking any of the gears off. It was amazing to me. It didn't jump time to destroy everything because they had nylon gears. I mean, they had aluminum gears with nylon teeth on them, and a lot of times they'd come off, they'd get down there, get up the oil pump, lock it up, and cause things to happen. Heads and valve, that's a 3-valve engine right there. The heads need cooling more than any other part of the engine. The head's the hottest part. That's why on a lot of vehicles nowadays, they don't have a regular engine coolant temperature sensor. They have cylinder head temperature sensors in both heads. Okay, so one of the cool things about having your spark, top coil spark, is if one particular cylinder is actually pinging, ping, 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 it can detect which cylinder is pinging, and it can turn off the spark or retard, not turn off the spark, but it retards the timing on that one cylinder. So it can change the ignition timer from cylinder to cylinder based on any pinging that it hears. Pinging meaning, your labor knocking off. You've heard that one sounds when it starts to overheat. You know, you sound like somebody's got marbles bouncing around in there, la, la, la. I mean, it's just rattling, it makes a terrible rattling noise, and that's the detonation thing. Whenever the piston's coming up, it's so hot in there, it lights off before the spark plug fires. That's what's going on there. That can be happening because of advanced ignition timing too far, or an engine that's running too hot, or compression that's too high because it's got carbon buildup on the heads and it's taking up room in the combustion chamber, that kind of thing. All right, okay, so you're all about building an old school V8, right?
And yeah,
Let's see if we can build an old school V8. All right, there's your block. Now what are we doing here? We're putting a crankshaft in it.
got
We're
your
putting a main
stroke.
cap, that's a 4-bolt main. All right, we're gonna do that, put that on there, now it turns through. When you're building an engine, it's really important, they do this at the factory. When you're putting that thing together, every time you tighten something else that's on that rotating assembly, you're gonna check the turning torque to make sure that it doesn't get too tight. If all of a sudden it gets too tight to turn, you need to back up and find out what you did wrong. And this is actually going pretty slow, but that's the timing cover, it's an old 350. And there's the oil pan. There's the oil filter. We put that on there a little early in mine. And then this is what how the valves and the push rods and the springs look like. And the big ones are the intake valve, the small ones are the exhaust valve. And there's your thermostat housing, fuel rail, plenum chamber, and your intake. And there's your throttle plate. Yay, there you go. There's the balancer, there's the water pump. And we got I don't see a camshaft in there, y'all. Looks like they left it out. Somebody did a wrong bad job on that thing.
No, they put a camshaft in.
Yeah,
Yeah. It looked like an empty hole when I looked at it a second ago. And there's your front end accessory drive. Headers. Once again, why are headers better than old cast iron exhaust
back
manifolds?
pressure.
Yeah, because you don't get the back pressure, it actually is extracting the exhaust because of the way those collectors are set up. All right. Now, we're gonna do this faster. Let's see if we can do this quicker. We can't do it quicker. I think I've already shown you all this anyway. All right. Now, compression, fuel, and ignition. All you gotta remember this, that an engine is running right, is well-oiled, carefully orchestrated machine. Breathes in the air, compresses, lights off the mix, you can see it happening out there. The oxygen, the hydrocarbons, create superheat. And what is it that's expanding to push the piston down when a combustion event happens? What gas?
Say that again?
Carbon.
Yeah, what's expanding and pushes a piston down? Nitrogen. Because the air that we're breathing is 78% nitrogen, and so you're superheating that nitrogen whenever that combustion event happens, and it's the expanding nitrogen that pushes the piston down. Probably never heard that before, did you? The nitrogen's what does it. Bernie Thompson calls that the working fluid, which is pretty cool, I think. Anyway, generally over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, whenever that thing's firing, it's going to have that. All right, when an engine is starting, the injector is double pulsed to wet the manifold, and the spark is happening barely before top dead center. Before top dead center is optimum. If you're just revving the engine up, you might notice that the spark happens sooner and sooner because the fuel only burns so fast. So your spark has to happen sooner so it'll have time to burn the maximum amount of power out of that push. Now, gasoline direct injected engines not only can control when the fuel is injected, they can control how it's injected, which is pretty cool. That's why you got a little 1.6 liter GDI engine pulling this big van or something, you know, because they got more power the way they're set up. That's another deal. But anyway, there's a little degree wheel there. Top dead center, everybody knows what top dead center is. You know what top dead center is? That's when the crankshaft's in the center, piston side is gonna go. How do you find top dead center? Like if I told you to find top dead center, let's go to number 3 on this one, how would you find it?
Turn it all the way up.
Well, wait a minute. How are you gonna know that you're on exhaust
Take the spark
intake
plug
stroke?
out.
What's the firing order on this one? You remember? 14, 25, 36? All right, we'll talk about that again in a minute. All right. Okay, after it starts at a no load idle, the ignition spark time and hovers around 10 to 15 degrees before top dead center, and the engine speed increases so that the timing, because fuel only burns so fast, so the spark has to happen sooner. You got it? All right, when you're accelerating or pulling hard, the timing retards a little bit to prevent detonation. And detonation is basically whenever the pressure increases in there, and you don't want it lighting off early and causing the pistons to ring like a bell. That's where you get your pinging noise. I like to remember this thing. There was a movie one time called Don't Tell Her It's Me. It had Steve Guttenberg and some little gal on it. And she drove out there to this two-story house looking for him, and an old Buick or something she was driving, a big old long thing. And when she switched it off, you ever heard a car diesel when you switch it off? You switch it off and it keeps running, you know, it quits running because of the heat, keeps lighting off the mix. Despite the fact you turned off the ignition, it keeps having combustion events and it keeps doing it enough to where it'll run for a little while before it shuts off sometimes. And I don't know how they did that for this movie, it's funny as all get out, but she got out and went in that house and went all the way up to the upstairs looking for that guy. And when you came back down, that car was still sitting there going, still dieseling. Then she just turned the key back on it was running again, she drove off. I always find that on video somewhere, it's funny to me. But anyway, knowing the firing order is important. Now, if you know the firing order, you can figure out the companion cylinders by drawing an imaginary distributor. Right there, you see that? You gotta know which way to turn. If the firing order is 187265543, 187265543, if you draw an imaginary distributor, 8 and 5 will be companions, 1 and 6 will be companions, 4 and 7 will be companions, and 3 and 2. Why is it important to know what the companion cylinders are?
One's on compression, one on exhaust.
Yep, and also, what else is going on with the companions? If it's got coil packs, both those are spark plugs are popping at the same time, even though one of them's in compression, the other one's exhaust. Alright? So you can also figure out the companion cylinders by dividing the firing order in half. Right? Like that, 1, 6, you know, like that right there. That's not too much of a big deal. What's that firing order that I just showed you, by the way? You recognize the firing order, what engine it was for?
What was it?
Remember what the firing order was? Can anybody repeat that back to me?
Which one?
That one that I showed you.
187,
1872, 65,
that's a 350.
Come on, come on. No, it's not 350.
43.
Yeah. I think that's a 5.3, which is different from a 350. You'd think it'd be the same, wouldn't you? But they're not.
It's still a 350.
No, well, it's a 327 if it's 5.3. How many cubic inches per liter?
60.
A 350 is what in liters?
A 5.3?
Yeah, no, a 350
Oh.
is what in liters? You know what a 5.3 is in liters, don't you? I mean, it's gonna be
350 divided by 61.
5.7.
Oh, yeah.
You knew that. You knew it. You just weren't thinking. Everybody just zoned out on me. What's up with that? All right. Here's the seal chamber. A lot of compression can be determined by setting the suspect cylinder on TDC compression stroke. Both valves closed, piston at top, crank center, and introducing air into the spark losses compression. So if you put air in that spark plug hole at the top, this is where the air is escaping. Intake, it'd be an intake valve. Exhaust valve. Crankcase, piston, the rings, bubbles in the radiator, head gasket, adjacent cylinder head gasket. Now, we can find out on that one which cylinder is pushing air into the intake. Can't we? How do you do it?
There's a little
Without pulling the motor out.
There's a tool you gotta put up too.
No. You pull all the plugs out but one. Fill the radiator up, spin it over, see if it disturbs the water. Move that plug to the next hole, spin it over, see if it disturbs the water. When you find the one that makes bubbles and makes the water jump, that's the cylinder that's pushing compression into the equipment. We had a 3-liter Taurus with low compression on cylinder number 1. Pulled all the spark plugs, got the cylinder number 1 on TDC compression by making sure its companion was on exhaust. Now, if you can find exhaust on one, you know that the other one should be on compression, right? We injected smoke into the number 1 spark plug hole and it came out the number 3 hole. What did that mean? We put smoke in the number 1 hole, it came out the number 3 hole. That told us what was wrong. What was wrong? There's a fire order, 142536. An engine like this one here. What do you have to do in order to figure out why smoke is coming out the number 3 hole if you shoved it in the number 1? You got to know the firing order, and you got to understand how the engine works to begin with, and which valves are open, and which pistons are coming up, and all that kind of stuff. All right. What stroke number 3 is on when number 1 is a TDC compression? So you got to think deeper than most people are willing to do stuff like this. So what cylinder? See, this is compression and firing units. 1, 4, 2, 5, 3, 6. 3 is coming up on exhaust. Right? So the exhaust valve on 3 is open. So if you're putting this in there, both valves are supposed to be closed, the smoke's coming out over here, that means the exhaust valve's letting the smoke, right? You got that? And it's going through the manifold now. So there you go. 3 is it PDC compression right there. 3 is it BDC firing and exhaust. See, there's your degrees of rotation. Right, we determined that the number 3 exhaust valve was open, so the exhaust valve was compromised on number 1. Customer crashes his CRX, buys a good CRX with a bad engine, and our task is to take the good engine and put it in the bad car. Sounds simple enough, doesn't it? All right, so the 88 CRX, we decided to check the bad engine. No compression on cylinder number 4. No compression at all on cylinder number 4. So then I said, well, let's go ahead and find out where it's going. So we put the cylinder leakage tester in cylinder number 4, and we had no compression, but we had no cylinder leakage either. How's that possible? Tim usually has the answer. What do you think, Tim? No compression, but no cylinder leakage. No, that would have let the cylinder would leak past the rings. The guy was revving it up, was winding it up so tight that it threw a rod, and then the crankshaft came around and busted that piece of rod off and knocked it out of there, and the piston was standing at the bottom of the hole. The piston wasn't moving, but everything was sealed up real good. Right? All right. So, 2 engines had 2 different kinds of fuel injection. The good car had TBI, the crash car had MFI. What's the best way to handle this? Look at that.
Change intakes.
Look at that. You got that, you got that. This is 1.5, that's 1.6. This is the one that was in his car that he crashed. This is the one that was in the car that, this is a bad engine, that we were needing to put this engine in there.
Just change
Now, you're pretty smart, because what we did was we broke this thing down. We took the intake and the exhaust, laid them back, turned that motor into a long block, dropped it in there, bolted up the exhaust and the intake, and we were good to go. Some of the guys in here were saying, well, we got to change out the wire harnesses and all of these fuel components. That was the silliest thing I ever heard, right? Okay, short block versus long block. Know the difference. Short block, it's got pistons, it's got the crankshaft. Long block, it's got the head. See that? The head, if you've got the timing belt on like that. Sometimes a long block on a Chevy engine on these V8s will have valve covers. They won't have an oil pan, but they'll have valve covers on it. Everything will be they used to call them Target Master engines when the Chevrolet people did. But this one guy that was a floor sweeper or something over at Ford place was out there, and me and one of the truck mechanics were standing outside the parts room talking for a minute about something. And he came out of there and he goes, I was going to buy an engine for my wife's van, so they're asking me a question I don't know in here. And I said, what do you need to know, John? He says, well, can you come out here and look at my wife's van and tell me if it's got a short block or a long block in it?
I heard that before.
And I told the truck mechanic looked at me and said, I'm going to let you handle this one. All right, so that's the V8, short and long blocks. Long, short block?